Hey team, Dr. Jack Orty here, and in the next series of videos, I'm going to be covering this concept of knowledge. Do we know anything? How do we know anything? And if we want to know something, what are some of the tools that we can use to sort of grasp a little bit of knowledge out of this world? And in particular, I'm going to look at statistics. Why do we use statistics, and how does it help us understand the world that we're living in? So to do that, I sort of want to strip back your confidence on knowledge and what you know. So let's start with this principle. You know nothing. You know nothing. And perhaps I could elaborate that a little bit more. You know nothing without statistics, maybe? So let's explore this idea a little bit more. So what we're going to do is we're going to delve, just scrape the surface of this concept of epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. And you might think, why do you need to study knowledge? Isn't it obvious? This table exists, my face exists, these glasses exist, knowledge is pretty easy to acquire. Well, what I hope to show you in this video and the next few videos, the knowledge isn't perhaps as easy to acquire as you thought, and there's a bit more to it. And that's why the field of epistemology exists, and ultimately is why the field of statistics exists. So let's dive into it. Here we've got my kitchen table, but let's call it the table of knowledge. And on this table of knowledge, let's put some stuff that we're pretty sure about, stuff that we know. Gravity exists, evolution is real, the earth goes around the sun, there is matter, there's physical stuff in this universe, and my dog is one of the greatest dogs of all time. His name is Rocky. He's the best, right? So these are things that we know, right? But here's what I want you to do. I want you to challenge yourself. Are you 100% sure on each of those things, right? And just to shake your foundation of knowledge, well, we can get rid of gravity right off the bat, because Einstein essentially proved that the force of gravity doesn't exist, and the reason why things come together is because they're traveling in straight lines on the curved path of space-time, right? So Newtonian gravity, the idea that the apple is attracted to the earth, doesn't exist. So we can scrap that off the table immediately. The earth going around the sun, well, this is a matter of perspective. Under Einsteinian physics, you could build a map of the universe where the earth is the middle, and the entire universe goes around the earth every 24 hours. The earth stays still. And that would all work in physics, right? So the earth going around the sun is a matter of convenience or perspective, but it's not necessarily true. Evolution, well, I mean, you have to get a bit more extreme with this, right? Perhaps an alien species or an evil demon or a deity perhaps created all of the earth and everything on it 100 years ago. We wouldn't know with all the historical records of before 100 years. Perhaps I've only just popped into existence. Perhaps I've only popped into existence a minute ago with all my memories of the past and all the records of the distant past already created. We couldn't possibly know. What about physical things? Do physical things exist? Does Rocky, my dog, exist? Well, when you think about it, my knowledge that Rocky exists comes from me touching him, seeing him, and smelling him, right? I haven't tasted him, so it's just those three. So me using my senses to evaluate that Rocky exists. But my senses can lie to me. We all know that our senses can lie to you. If you have a very vivid dream, that is your senses lying to you. You can wake up thinking that something is real. We're learning more and more with psychology that our perception of reality is warped dramatically, and it's based on our expectations and our memories. This is why Bigfoot keeps popping up all throughout America, for example. But even more to that, we could be perhaps in the movie The Matrix. Perhaps we are being lied to by some super sophisticated AI race, and so none of the world exists and it's all been simulated onto our brain. And so there was a very famous philosopher called Renee Descartes who sort of came up with this principle of skepticism. And what he said was, let's wipe the table clean of knowledge and only put things we're 100% sure on back onto the table of knowledge. Yeah, so this is Cartesian skepticism. This is Renee Descartes, a French philosopher during the Enlightenment. And he said all of our knowledge ultimately is dependent on our senses. Every single thing we know is dependent on our senses. And because our senses can lie to us, hallucinogenics, dreams, all that kind of biz, we could be living in the Matrix. Perhaps everything is fake and everything is lied to us. Now, obviously, Renee Descartes hadn't watched the fantastic movie series of The Matrix, but he proposed a demon. Perhaps a demon had created the world and lied to it, created a virtual world, which was a complete lie through our senses. Perhaps we're all just brains floating in a vat of liquid, and all our sensations are being simulated by a demon. So he said, you know what? We can't know anything except for one thing. He proposed that we did know one thing. And that is, I think, therefore I am. Now, you've probably all heard that famous phrase, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Now, it is not some motivational speech by some yoga guru going, if you think you can be enlightened, and maybe if you think you could be an astronaut, you can be. You just have to believe. That is definitely not what he's saying. What he's saying is that knowledge is unobtainable. We cannot know anything because our senses could be lying to us. The only thing we can know is that I exist. Just me. I can't know that you exist. I can only know that I exist, because he proposed there must be something which is asking the question, what exists? And so by having that question in your thoughts, you therefore, I think, therefore I am, but everything else could be fake. But what happened then was a Scottish guy called David Hume possibly came and stole a lot of ideas from Buddha about 2,000 years apart. And they came up with the idea, well, maybe you don't even exist. Maybe the self doesn't exist. David Hume called it bundle theory. Buddha called it enlightenment. But it essentially goes something like this. It's quite similar as far as I can understand. Like I'm not an expert on the Buddha, but this is my understanding from David Hume's writings, and my understandings is that they're pretty similar. The idea is that the self is an entity that we imagine that's in our brain that makes our thoughts, makes our decisions, sort of controls us like a kid with a controller. So do I like Coca-Cola? There's a little guy in there going, yep, you like Coca-Cola. And a little person in there going, you think you should next think this, you should then go over there, you should then do this, right? We have this concept that there is this self in there that is selecting thoughts from a range of options to generate my personality, who I am, my memories, all sort of managing it as this person. There was a fantastic Pixar movie called Inside Out that depicted it as like 5 different characters, each representing a different emotion. But essentially, that's an extrapolation of what we all believe. We all believe that there is a little version of me inside my brain making these decisions and coming up with these thoughts and everything like that. That there is this conscious being inside of me that's thinking and getting to choose those thoughts that enter their brain. That's the concept of self, right? Well, David Hume called it bundle theory, and he was the idea, well, just in the way that I don't get to choose what visual stimuli my eyes are seeing. If I'm looking at the screen, I am seeing that. I don't get to pick and choose from those pixels that are entering my eyes. And just in the way that that is a lie, that could be a lie. I could be dreaming. I could be in the Matrix. That could be a demon. Just those similar properties could apply to thoughts. He proposed that perhaps thoughts are just these random things bumping into our consciousness, and there is actually, in fact, no self at the center of that process, and it's also random and uncontrolled, and it too could be a demon to just floating thoughts into consciousness, creating this concept of self, which is a bit more of a dark interpretation than I imagine Buddha has of it when it comes to enlightenment. But let's explore that idea a bit more, because it sounds a bit far out there. But what I want to do is I want all of us to take 1 minute to not think. Just do a few deep breaths, and then I want you to not think. Not let any thoughts into your mind. Okay, here we go. You haven't started trying yet, have you? Do it. Close your eyes, couple of breaths, and let's do it. Okay, 3, 2. Okay, I'm willing to bet you all at least $1 that thoughts entered your mind, even though you didn't want them to, even though you instructed them not to. And I bet those thoughts were a little bit random, a bit like, oh yeah, I wonder what's on TV tonight, or do I really like Pepsi? He mentioned Coke, or these kinds of things. I bet you had a plan not to think, and I bet you the thoughts that came into your mind were probably a little bit surprising, probably a little bit out there. Now, that kind of meditation is a thing called mindfulness meditation. I'm a big fan of it. It's not wooey or anything. It's just watching the thoughts that enter your brain, and it's kind of humbling to know that you don't have as much control over the thoughts that enter your brain as you might think. But anyway, so here we go. We've gone through this journey from Renee Descartes to David Hume, and Buddha's wrapped in there too, and we're realizing that perhaps we know literally nothing. We can't even know that we exist. There may not even be a self. There's definitely potentially no reality out there. Our senses could be lying to us. We all could be on a crazy cocktail of drugs that were delivered to us by an alien species to make us go on a lifelong hallucination. Who knows? We can't possibly know anything for 100% sure. But can we move on from that, right? Can we move on from that? Because we have to live in this world, whether or not it's an illusion or not. And so can we say, given the world is real, given that I exist, can science work? And that's what we're going to touch on in this next video coming up. Can science work if we presume that some of this base knowledge is true, that the world is real, that we're real, and our senses aren't lying to us?